Welcome to the Coworking Values Podcast. I'm Emily Breeder. If you're a community manager struggling with reaching your audience, our latest offering is designed for you. In this 3-month cohort, we will help you build your community, learn practical strategies, and stay motivated with personalized guidance. Join us to transform your workflow and strengthen your community management skills. Look in the description of this podcast for more information on how to sign up.
Hi, this is Francesca from Virtual Headquarters here. We support co-working spaces throughout the UK and in Europe soon by promoting virtual office revenue for them. Not only that, but we offer to promote your co-working and your meeting room spaces to all of our clients throughout the UK. And the best bit is, we don't take any brokerage cuts. If you check out the show notes, there's a link to how our virtual office partnership works. And if you want to arrange a call with me, I'd be happy to discuss everything and talk you through the process. I hope to speak to you soon. Thanks.
Hello, folks, and welcome to this week's edition of the most beautiful podcast about co-working in Central Europe. Today in the studio is, can I call you a friend, Gareth? You know, I feel we've got something going nowadays.
I'd be disappointed if you didn't.
There we go. Yeah. So I first met Gareth somewhere in, I think it was co-working Milan, when he was the only other, I'm going to say British person, but I know you're Welsh. And then I remember, and I say this every podcast, I remember standing in the corridor in the football stadium in Dublin in 2017 with you and Mandy, and you announced this idea called Town Square, which I thought was really cool. And what is Town Square now, Gareth?
Yeah, it's a Town Square. We're a B Corp, which isn't too much of a unique identifier nowadays, but we're a B Corp. We're based in Wales, as you mentioned, but most of our spaces are across England. We're a network of 8 spaces, and then we've got a couple of associated spaces as well. But basically, the way we see it is we're trying to create community-focused workspaces, which are really kind of focused on trying to drive economic value for that local region.
So I pulled you in here today, which we were talking about before we came on air, is that word independent, because for a long time I used to say in everything I put online, independent co-working spaces. And then you wrote a post which was about independent, how we're independent and what does independent mean. And if we're all being too independent, we're not collaborating together. So can you elaborate on that to set up the rest of the discussion, please?
Yeah, I suppose I've always, maybe this is one of the things about living in one of the devolved nations as well, is that there's a lot of conversation about independence at that level when it comes to devolution and independent governance and that kind of stuff. But from an independent business thing, I've always just found the term independent really icky, because I think it normalizes this really strange alpha value of, you don't deserve your credit unless you've done it all on your own. And I think, coming off the back of the Olympics in the last couple of weeks as well, and going into the Paralympics now, when you see success as it's a team effort, and it comes from people who recognize they're part of that team, and people who don't necessarily see themselves as being integral, but absolutely are. And I think my feeling is independent businesses, the definition of them, we can define them based on ownership or based on this or that, but the true sense of it is this interdependence with other people. And if we were much more open about that, I think we'd build much more sustainable businesses as a result of it.
So it's about being open that you need help to get your project business going and running.
Yeah,
and that interdependent.
It's being open to the fact that the success you've achieved so far is not just down to your own efforts, it's down to a team effort. And it's open to going forward, feeling like you can ask for help when you need help. It's not, there's no shame in asking for help when you really need it, just because you're trying to hold on to this idea of being independent or going it alone, or, all the language we use when we're talking about entrepreneurship and freelancing.
Because the reason I used independent is similar to Cat Johnson, is that, like her, I'm obsessed with music. So it was the independent record label. So so many of the cool bands I know are indie labels. So it was that little romantic idea I had going on. But since you made that post and got me thinking about it, I've changed the language to say, I always say micro and small business owners, because a lot of the people I'm sort of or we're talking to are around the London co-working assembly that's the language that is used in the UK. And I particularly say micro because so many, and you might have a different thing for this, but when people say the government category for small business is something like, I don't know, 10 million turnover. Do you know what it is off the top of your head? Because I should have looked that up before I came here.
For a micro?
For a micro and a small business, there's this category, and small business is like way bigger than you think it is.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, right? So it tends to go up in micro is normally 0 to 10 people. Then you go for small is 10 to 50, I believe, and then medium is 50 to 250. And then, turnover wise, you're talking under 2 million for a micro. So it's, under 2 million for a lot of people, that's not a micro business. That's a pretty decent business, right?
Yeah.
Or a well-performing business. And I think that the language here is quite interesting, quite important, because I think someone who from scratch within 5 years has set up a business which is turning over 2 million, they may feel like, they've created something big for their community, but the definition of it is that it's micro. And I think we see that language and that can be quite provocative, but going beyond that, I think the impact of a company is more important. And I think that's what, trying to think about in music context is a really good example, because it's almost saying it's independent of. So it's not saying independent and that being a blanket term. It's saying independent of external influence, or independent of people who've got no interest in the values or the mission of the company making decisions about how it's done and the operations. So it's that independent of bit. And then equally, like you say, the scale and size of the company, how important is that based on what our personal values are as well?
So what would you, to connect, if we were talking about coffee shops, is we don't mind these people coming, obviously, but like the people that will get the most out of the conversations we're having either in this podcast or in the European Co-working Assembly or the London Co-working Assembly and things like European Co-working Day, everyone's welcome. But the people that we really want to connect for the reason you said is you can't go it alone, you don't have that support, are all the spaces that are like one or two people are running them. Someone like Contingent Works in Bromley, run by Stephen, and I've forgotten his name, and it will come to me. I've got to shout it out in a minute. Ewan. They're two business partners, and they took over a carpet shop, and they've turned it into a thriving, what I would call independent co-working space. But how would you? Are they would you say micro businesses that are co-working spaces, or what's the languaging you'd use around that to get to people like Stephen and Ewan? Or so they would recognize themselves in the conversation.
Yeah, and I think this is where this gets quite interesting, right? Because the term independent business or independent startups, etc., doesn't upset too many people. So on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. It comes down to, I think, kind of two factors for me that I think are important and why we need to take this seriously. The one is going forward and that knowledge that no one does it alone. So being interdependent and recognizing the value that other people play in your success story and in your downtimes just as much. And then the other part is around market-driven factors and choice. So how do you quality control for? I think we have a much bigger battle on our hands right now when we're talking about the traditionally defined as independent businesses versus, large corporations, mega chains, etc. When it comes to value extraction, when it comes to quality of service, but we're all in. I don't want to go too off piece here, but we're all in this kind of mindset now where we can't afford to make mistakes and we can't afford to get things wrong. And so it is super tempting just to go to a chain to get your coffee or to get your lunch or to get your breakfast when you're out on the go, rather than taking a risk on an independent business or something like this. So there's this really weird psyche I think we have now around how we support smaller businesses. Because even just that, like you say, that idea of going with a micro or small, there's an element of kind of almost risk attached to that idea of if you go with someone like that, overusing a dependable, reliable corporation. We all know that's not true, right? We all know, whether it's us as organizations or us as customers, we know that you can get a much more authentic and satisfying experience by going with an independent business. But we have this really weird relationship now with how we choose to spend our money, or where we choose to base our companies, or where we choose to have our lunch. So the important thing, I think, within all of this, for a space like Contingent Works, or for a space like any space, is trying to find an identity that, yes, makes you competitive in the market, and that's what we've got to boil it down to, but equally puts you in a position where you can do more because you've got this wider, deeper community of people behind you, supporting you, that all play a role in success.
That walking into a chain, that's one of the things of when like so many people around the time 2018, there were a few people who may even be listening to this I was working with, and they said, "Oh, I want to be like WeWork." And I'm like, "Why do you want to be like WeWork?" And they, what they really wanted to be like WeWork is like everyone knows who they are. That's what they were trying to say. But it's like you are, and this wasn't Stephen and Ewan, but it's like they would say, they are, I would go there mainly because they're massive David Bowie fans, and they met at the school gates of David Bowie's primary school where their children go nowadays, and they have a David Bowie sign in the thing. So like, that's why I'm so down on them. But they have this identity, and they own it. But then going around the world, I mean, you must have heard this from people. It's like easier for Vodafone to sign up to WeWork because they go to there's one in every city or something, So, it's like a safe bet for them. But there's this other conversation, like actually a good example of this will make my point quicker, is that thing that Alex Hillman is involved in Philadelphia, which is the 10,000 Independence. And where, and I'll put a link in the show notes, guys, where this started years ago. Amazon said they were going to open their head office there, and the local authority got really excited, like 10,000 new jobs. And then Alex and a load of other people came out with, I know that's 10,000 new jobs. When they shut up shop and go to Atlanta because the property's cheaper, there's going to be 10,000 new jobs we didn't have. And if we had 10,000 independents, that would be more for the city, and not just in economic terms, but in community building terms and interdependence, like, you stress here. And there's that stat, which a lot of you would have heard, which is, in the UK, and it might have changed now, but it's still going to be near. If you spend £1 with a local independent economic place like a shop or a baker's or a co-working space, that pound will go around the local economy 4 times. Whereas if you go and buy a sandwich in a chain, it will just disappear to wherever they keep their money.
Yeah. And I think that's the bit, right, where if you choose to go down that route, but that's also to recognize that, larger chains do have some kind of economic role in the system. But yeah, Alex, I'm holding Alex's tiny MBA book in my hand right now. And the way that he defines it around, like, it's about being sustainably independent. And I think that's the romantic part of this that I think appeals so much, and why this has really caught on as an idea, is that it's that idea of not needing anyone else to be a gatekeeper or a master of your own destiny. And that's great, and that's an important position to start from. But it's recognizing the ecosystem and the people around you. And I think, the way that Alex talks about it in his book is that it's this idea about taking on the issues that, prevent access to affordable healthcare or skill building or whatever else it might be. And that in itself illustrates the importance of interdependence. It's saying that independent freelancers require these other things to move, but it's, from a political perspective or from a policy perspective, it is just so much easier, right? If you can get one employer to come in and create 10,000 jobs, that's going to win you votes. And we talked about this in, What If There Were No Freelancers, which was the paper we published earlier this year, was this idea of even a network or a community of freelancers don't have the same issues or don't face the same challenges. So trying to have a single coherent message that cuts through when you've got so many more people who are able to lobby in a more coherent way, it's bloody hard, right? So this idea of, when you were saying that example of spaces who just say, oh, we want to be like WeWork, there is that, that knowing that you've created something that resonates. And I remember, like, our first space, Welsh Ice in the South Wales Valleys, I'll meet people at events now, and they'll tell me about Welsh Ice without knowing I was involved, and they'll have a completely different origin story to what really happened. And it's just seeing that kind of legend or that story grow in different ways and take on its own life is great, and it's quite exciting. But it's not something that happens in the first 2 or 3 years when you're kind of trying to build or grow something. It's something that comes a decade or so on. So I think the WeWork thing about renown is important. I think honestly a bigger part of that probably is about being rich and being validated as well. People thinking you're important and thinking that you've created something important, and that comes from ultimately achieving success with it. So I think that then equally comes to that thing about the independent coffee shop. A lot of that's around the culture you're trying to create and why you want to create it, because so many of these businesses, you're going to be slogging for years before you kind of hit that point of traction, and it being what you want it to be. And even then, it won't be what you had an idea of at the start. It will evolve into something else. But that comes from a deep passion. And I think we have an association with larger chains that they're not opening their spaces with a passion to create something from the local areas. And does it matter, or is it just a utility? And that's fine, and that's part of the offering. But there will always be a part of the market that's looking for something else.
That's interesting, because I speak to people that have, people in a similar situation to you and Mandy. They started off with 1, then they got 2, and then they suddenly got 8, and their heart is in the small independent. Sorry, I keep on saying it. that I'm going to say independent, just otherwise we'll never move on. Fine. Their heart is there, so they've grown something to like 8 spaces, but they recognize there's some people I talk to and they just want to grow, and kind of it's okay if they want to grow, but that's just not where my heart is. But they're like, oh my God, I've suddenly got this many spaces going on, and I don't know what I'm doing anymore. No, I don't know what I'm doing. That's not like I wanted this. I wanted a band that would go around and play in clubs, and now we're playing stadiums. Oh my God! There's a bit in Steve Martin's
stadiums, book. And now we have kids, and we don't want to be on the road on tour, right? It's that the whole picture always changes. And I still deeply believe in this idea that our economy would be more equitable, would be more fair if we had a town square in every town square. But I equally recognize I don't want to grow a company that is reliant on VC. This is the independent bit. I don't want to be in a position where I've got a VC breathing down my neck, telling me what company they want me to grow. So there is an element of this which is about our independent spirit, but recognizing that we're interdependent on a wider range of supporters and partners in other ways in order for us to be able to live that life and live that dream. So my core belief is still if we had a bit of that, but I do think with everyone that we grow, the level of impact you can achieve somewhat slightly decreases. I think because you bleed into the dough, right? And so I think there must be a way of doing it. And my belief is that in the UK, that's what I see, and that's what I live and breathe. And this might apply in other countries, and I think it does. But we need something different. We need an alternative offering for how we convene people in our communities, especially people who have got, who are economic agents, whether it's as entrepreneurs or freelancers who are trying to build a better alternative. And so I have a core belief in that, but I don't think that the property sector, I don't think that, all of these factors, I don't think there's enough sustainability in them for us to have that appetite to take on that risk, right? Without being too kind of open and candid. So I think there is this interesting balance around how you can support people to create these offerings that are independent of wider influence, but equally, there's value that comes from that learning and that expertise as well. So the space being open for 10 years is more important than an amazing space being open for 2 years and working out they couldn't keep it open, right? What would you rather? Would you rather something that is around for a longer time and then there's compound value that's created over that decade, or something which burns bright and burns out?
It's I still have this vision, dream, hope that there will be a co-working space in every town, and it will be, and we've spoken about this lots, it will be like where people come and flip open their laptop and do their work, but also this is multifunctional space. And I think, between you and, even people like Freddie, and there's loads more who I'm forgetting, Contingent Works does this. It's like a convening point for people in the neighborhood. And that builds community, and that builds the local economy and everything like that. And every time we go into a project, that's like what we open our mouths shouting about.
Yeah, and that's what I love when I go into another space, which is, like you mentioned Freddie and Patch there. When I go to a Patch space and you hear members talking about how much that space means to them, that's like the old economic mindset would be to look at that and maybe be jealous or envious or see that as competition or as a threat. I want that stuff to thrive. Like that's my, I turned 40 this summer, and I've got probably another 30 years of my career left. I'd rather spend 30 years doing something I'm passionate about and I care about, than constantly see the world through cynical spectacles, right? So I think it's that belief that there are other people who can do this. We don't own that, and we're not the only ones who can do it. That's the thing that gives you confidence and joy, in a way that the old economic model of being independent, or this old idea of being independent, prevents you from seeing the world that way, right?
It does. There's I think I've never felt closer to all this happening. Just the way there's things unfolding that I don't like, but there's so much unfolding that I really, really do like. I think it's just easier for people to understand the role a space can play. Talking of spaces, what did you do last week?
Yeah, we opened a beautiful space in Kingston on the riverside, which is just perfect. I mean, like, we've not had a space which has had that much interest pre-launch before, and that's quite kind of exciting too. But just the one thing I do regret about my job that I've created is that I don't have all of those spaces on my own doorstep, because to be able to walk to somewhere like Kingston would just be the dream. So really excited about that one. Did
you have anyone come and speak there, Gareth?
Well, this is the joy. So I started at the start of the year. I started to kind of wean myself off social media, but I delved deep back into the cesspit about 2 or 3 weeks ago to share a bit of a call to the community to say, what books should we have in our spaces? And then I was reminded of the joy of when social media really works for the better. So that got a lot of engagement, and people were sharing their book recommendations. So I can't remember how many books we ordered in the end, something like 50 or 60 books for our space. But one of the authors that was tagged was John Alexander, who recently published Citizens. And it just so happened that he was going to be in Kingston that night, and that he grew up in Kingston, went to school in Kingston, his publisher is in Kingston. And it was just one of those really perfect stories of a local publisher, local author, and it's just all the beauty and joy of serendipity and coincidence. So he came in and said a few words about what the model they're trying to put forward with that book, which if anyone hasn't read it, they absolutely should, around empowering citizenship. This is, I think, going back to your point there, this is where this gets exciting, right? There are so many overlapping ideas, and none of us have fully worked it out. So this ability to be interdependent and to be able to lean on other big ideas that start to make sense of whatever this emerging movement is, that is not, it's not threatening. It's an evolution of where we are now, as opposed to a scorched earth approach, right? I think there's something deeper happening right now, which I feel really motivated and excited by, and it won't just happen unless we all, work our asses off. So, like, that's where I get excited about all these overlapping ideas coming to the fore at the same time, like you mentioned, with what's happening over in Philadelphia, and being able to bring someone like John in to come and give a talk for us was just wonderful.
I am. That's where my hope and energy is at the moment, and it's based upon 14 years of hanging around the co-working industry, and just spending a lot of time watching how things happen and put together, and all the highs and lows and stuff like that. But on the 17th, we'll put a link in the show notes to this, and you're going to be there, aren't you, Gareth? On the 17th of September, we're having John Alexander is coming back to London, and we're going to do a morning on membership with John Alexander. And that is going to be lots of people in the room, breaking into small groups, having a chat, coming back, sharing everything like that. So it is going to be very interdependent and interactive and things like that. And the value, Gareth has come and run workshops like this where people get together, and most of the event is people come into the event talking to each other and sharing ideas. And that has taken, you said about how long it takes to get things going, Gareth, but getting that model going and getting everyone into the groove of not like obediently sitting listening to someone pontificate from the stage, it's taken a while to get people into it. But that's where the magic is for everybody. So we'll put a link in the show notes to that. And then in the afternoon, we're going to walk across London Bridge to a venue which I've forgotten the name of, and then 360 are going to run a similar kind of workshop, but it's about how to design a co-working space for accessibility and neurodivergent. And this is really valuable to people who are small, micro, independent co-working operations, because you'll get to spend an afternoon with a team of amazing designers asking loads of questions and be around other people who are talking about how to design a space. So if you need to go off and design a space or thinking of making changes to your space, you'll get so much valuable information there just from the other people in the room. Gareth, where can we find you online, sir?
Well, not so much anymore, but yeah, LinkedIn is probably, unfortunately, where I spend most of my time now. I'm still grieving and mourning the loss of Twitter. But yeah, LinkedIn, Gareth I. Jones, or townsq.co.uk.
We'll put a link in the show notes to all of that. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your ongoing energy. Is like all the white papers and stuff you put over the years have really genuinely shaped my thinking around how we do stuff. So thank you for that, sir.
Thank you.